Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's an honor to join in on this debate this evening. And I want to thank my colleagues in the New Democratic Party for bringing this forward as an emergency debate. I completely agree this is an emergency. I'm speaking to you from the traditional territories of the Saanich First Nations and raise my hands to them, speaking SENÇOÞEN. Haishka Siem. It's important tonight that we remember we're talking about a university that offers programs for anglophones, francophones, and in indigenous languages, Haishka Siem. I want to start at a broader level of abstraction of post-secondary education in Canada in general in crisis, and then focus in on Laurentian. I hope to be able to offer some useful suggestions, I hope. Back in 2005, Madam Speaker, in the last book written by Jane Jacobs, one of Canada's great minds, Dark Age Ahead was the title of her last book. And she spoke of the threats to 5 major pillars of civilization and culture. And she said they were all under assault: family, community, science, proper taxation, and education, specifically post-secondary education. She said it was under assault because it was being transactionalized. We were trading in education for the purposes of broadening our minds and exploring what we could be internally, finding our talents. We were trading education for something she described as certification. You pay your money, you get your ticket. So that young people were increasingly consumers, as Jane Jacobs explained, of a decreasingly impoverished intellectual experience, with larger and larger classroom sizes, less and less contact in students and their professors. It led to, of course, more insecurity around the finances of universities. We've seen a real trend where universities have to be beholden to large corporate enterprises, large corporations, some foreign, some Canadian, with chairs in this and that. When I was teaching at Dalhousie University, it was very hard to see that the professors working on the threats to marine mammals from seismic testing would get very far when Shell gave a lot of money to the university to run a chair in offshore oil and gas development. The money also tended to flow in ways that meant that the research that was produced by universities became proprietary. The information that was gleaned from academic pursuits had suddenly become the property of the corporations funding the universities. These trends are dangerous. We've also had a increasingly large bureaucracy in universities, often focused on fundraising. So you see these trends towards we have to raise money, and what do wealthy people want? Well, they want to give money so that the building is in their name. You don't see tenure track positions created with a big plaque on the name of the professor that says the wealthy person who gave the money so that professor has a tenure track position. The trends are not good, and these apply right across Canada. The federal government provides, as I mentioned in an earlier question to the Honourable Member for London Fanshawe, the federal government provides billions of dollars in federal provincial transfers to provinces for universities and post-secondary, but we don't track that we know where those dollars actually go. So the trend lines aren't good. And as I said, Jane Jacobs pointed this all out in 2005. We see some of the most poorly paid workers in Canada are the exploited group of recent PhDs who don't ever really get a tenure track position, but teach part-time and as sessional lecturers. And we see increasingly reduced opportunities for students and increased tuition, increased student debt. I suggest that the whole pile of financial mistakes and failure to support post-secondary education adequately is a national crisis. Turning now to Laurentian University, which of course is tonight's focus. Laurentian is in Sudbury, a wonderful community, and I've been very honored to have given lectures at Laurentian University over the years. It's a community. Sudbury went from being a moonscape, literally described as a moonscape, to being a green and sustainable place. Laurentian University and the research done there in places like the Cooperative Freshwater Ecosystem Work and Ecology Institute are part of that story. So too, of course, is what's been happening with a francophone education, indigenous education. I want to speak of the students tonight because we haven't heard the students' voices. My daughter's friend, Kristen Lavallée, wrote this letter, which was published in the local newspapers, saying that the people who made the financial mistakes that have led to Laurentian being in bankruptcy protection, they need to be held accountable. These are Kristen's words because the students have been going through a terribly stressful time. Quote, "We as students deserve to have clarity about our choices in order to continue our education. Laurentian University is a publicly funded institution which should be receiving the support of the provincial and federal governments. Instead, staff, faculty, and students are experiencing the brunt of the irresponsibility of a select few in administration. It is important that we hold the people who are responsible for having caused the current fiscal chaos at Laurentian University accountable." Those are the words of Kristen Lavallée, student at Laurentian University. I also note that Senator Monsian from the other place has made it very clear that what we're talking about here are constitutionally enshrined rights and that they must be protected. Quote, "Upholding these rights requires strong institutions. Canadian courts have long recognized the importance of maintaining strong institutions, protecting language and the culture of official language minority communities. Substantive equality requires it." Laurentian University's situation is not unique, reflects the continuing underfunding of post-secondary institutions that wholly or partially serve official language minority communities across Canada. The case of Laurentian University is sounding the alarm, as is this underfunding that threatens constitutional rights of communities. This is a very important point that we're not just talking about one small problem. This requires really creative, out-of-the-box thinking for the federal government to take control of this and say, I'm sorry, it was wrong to apply corporate commercial insolvency protection in the case of a publicly funded university. I'm going to switch over on my interpretation. Sorry about that. Je veux dire aussi en français que maintenant...
I would also like to say in French that now this is a crisis for Francophone minority communities in Ontario and across Canada because of the elimination of programs in this university, and especially the treatment received by the Francophone professors is an attack on the vitality of the French language in minority communities. Madam Speaker, I want to say clearly that we must do something different.
To protect this university, we have to have the federal government say, I'm sorry to the province. It's provincial jurisdiction usually, but constitutionally protected rights are at risk. Mismanagement of this university includes a mania for building, which has led them, the spending spree is the proximate cause of their financial disaster of the moment. I agree with the students. I agree with the faculty association. And if you're watching tonight, students and faculty, the 110 fired professors of Laurentian University, this is a wrong that members of parliament understand is wrong. And we want to fight for you. We will ask and demand that in the budget that we'll see on Monday, there be a special new paragraph being drafted right now to ensure that Laurentian University, its programs, its midwifery programs, its Indigenous language programs, its programs in environmental studies, that its programs in philosophy and theater be resurrected, that Laurentian University not go under. It's the canary in our educational coal mine, and we'll fight for it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et comments?
Questions and comments?
The honourable member for Edmonton, Alberta. Edmonton, Strathcona.
Edmonton, Strathcona. But it is in Alberta, so you're most of the way there, Madam Speaker. Thank you. I'd like to thank my colleague. I similarly have not seen her in person in a very long time, and so this is how we see each other now. And I was very moved by some of the comments she made. Of course, she will know that in Edmonton, Strathcona, in fact, the University of Alberta is under incredible attack by our provincial government, and we are risking losing an awful lot, not just the campus Saint Jean, but the university itself. And so I'm curious as to what she would say, what we can do, what at the federal level, what are those concrete things that we can do to protect our universities? You know, she luckily has an NDP government in British Columbia, but in Alberta, we do not. We have a conservative government. And I'm just wondering what she would suggest we could do despite our government, since we know that we can't do it in collaboration with our government.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thanks to my friend from Edmonton, Strathcona. I've never applied the adverb luckily to having an NDP government that's cutting through our old growth fracking and ignoring its commitment to shut down Site C. But moving on to the point of what do we do about better provincial federal cooperation, I think we have to make sure that money that's transferred to provinces for post-secondary education is tied to spending on post-secondary education. I agree with her wonderful colleague from London, Fanshawe, that we need a post-secondary education act in Canada that ensures, again, that we hold to standards. We're looking at a slippery slope where we'll have students who emerge from universities with, as Jane Jacobs says, you pay your money, you get, said before her death, pay your money, get your ticket, and you're not really getting the educational experience that goodness knows I was very fortunate to get 40 years ago when I went to law school. I think we need to pay attention to this.
So I got to go to another question, the questions and comments. The honourable member for Langley Aldergrove.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member for Saanich Gulf Islands for her impassioned speech. Thank you for that. Now, the member talked about universities having to think outside of the box, and I wonder what her comments would be about universities partnering with responsible Canadian-controlled corporations that have a good track record of social responsibility to fund research chairs and to partner with the intellectual property assets that would come out of that very valuable research.
Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you very much, my colleague. Obviously, any place that universities can partner is welcome, as long as it doesn't restrict or transactionalize the intellectual process of research. Publicly funded universities and the work in academia should remain publicly accessible. Information should not be privatized. Knowledge should be shared. But in that kind of partnership, absolutely.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable député de...
Questions and comments? The honourable member from Saint-Hyacinthe-Bacotte, a brief question, please. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for her speech, and especially for having cited Jane Jacobs. She's someone I admire a great deal, and I would like to ask if there is a problem, according to her, with bilingual universities where there is a strong majority of anglophone students. And I know that this is the will of some people. Should the governments of the French language programs be transferred to francophone universities?
Highlands has 1 minute to respond. Gulf Island, I believe your mic might be on mute. I'm not sure if we... Oh.
Merci.
Thank you to my colleague. Thank you. It is so important to protect the rights of francophone students who are in minority situations. Perhaps he is right. It's the first time that I have heard the idea that there is a threat to other students in such a context, but I think that we need the richness and the richness of these three cultures, Indigenous, French, and English. We need to share the values and the reality of living in French.